Welcome back to the Ink Sink. I am Annie.
I'm Kaylee.
This is the publishing podcast for the rest of us, where we talk about books and news and writing, and today we are talking about genre tropes. For those of you who are confused, we actually changed our format last episode. We are bringing this to you. Our main topic section is going to be on its own this week.
Dun dun. Sorry, I'll stop. But also, yes, we're changing things up a bit just because we got some feedback.
You guys asked for this.
That's what you wanted.
You want us every week? This is how you're getting us. Oh my god. Stop complaining.
Stop loving us so much.
Ugh, you weirdos. So the episode this week is just going to be our main topic. No news. If you are interested in the news, recent publishing events, you can go and listen to our last episode. That should be the very last one in your feed. So today we are starting a brand new series on genre tropes. We decided that this was something we were super interested in exploring as
It's a fun, very interesting, and very immersive topic in fantasy. It really is, just to be clear. And just tropes in general. Tropes it's something that has just been written enough and formalized enough in such a way that you're able to kind of draw, not necessarily like rules, but literary similarities for the topic. And that's how it becomes a trope. That is what defines the trope. And so some of the initial topics that we're discussing are, what are these fantasy tropes? Or what are the underpinnings for our favorite genre? Because we're both fantasy nerds. And so we'll start there, and we may have other tropes that we discuss within fantasy, but that's kind of our initial launch point where we'll ultimately branch out from.
Yeah, so this is a brand new series. If you have any feedback for us, please let us know, or if you have anything you want us to talk about. I will say the main feedback that you guys give us that we have just not taken yet is that you want to hear about book adaptations, because that is such a broad topic. That's not even a topic, really. That's just like an idea. It's a vibe, and that's fine.
We like vibing, however.
Give us more specifics. Anyway, so we each decided that we're going to pick a trope within a genre, and we settled on the fantasy genre. Again, as Kaylee said, we are both fantasy nerds, and I chose the Three Witches trope, and you chose the Chosen One trope, I believe.
Sure did.
So I'm gonna start just because I'm very excited. I hope you don't mind.
Thank you. I know, I always love it. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about the Three Witches trope in fantasy. So normally you'll see the Three Witches out there as guides or something similar. And I will preface this by saying that all of my research was on the Western European tradition of the Three Witches. Obviously the most famous case is in Macbeth. The three weird sisters in the forest telling Macbeth that he will be king, but only if
X, Y, or Z, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I feel like I had a slightly stronger Greek mythology phase than you did, at least. I think that the idea or the concept of the trope appeared and was potentially subverted many times throughout most of the literature that I read. Patricia C. Reed had a lot of that in her comedy series about the Forbidden Forest, which was absolutely delightful, and I thoroughly recommend. They're very quick reads, and they're just a lot of fun. One of her probably most iconic characters is Morwen. Pretty sure I'm remembering the name correctly, who's a witch who is uninterested in all of that nonsense. But speaking separately of the less modern variety to the myth, the Greek mythology is chock full of it because it's based on the fates. Specifically, you had the crone, the mother, and the maiden. In the fates, the one who held the shears, the architect of the design, and then the one who cut the yarn, which was your life, essentially. That's been around for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And it weaves very thoroughly through Greek mythology, which, speaking of sort of ancient archetypes and tropes, I picked out the chosen one pretty much every single possible Greek hero
yeah, exactly.
was chosen in some form or fashion, frequently to their detriment.
Yeah.
The fates were not always kind, and that is, the three witches are not always kind. And that's what happens with, as they are very thoroughly maybe defined as anew in Macbeth, which was Shakespeare's revitalization. Macbeth doesn't do great. I mean, he's not a great person.
No.
But also, maybe he wouldn't have done what he did if he hadn't had some very unfortunate cheerleaders along the way.
Yeah, I think that that's something that I came across in my research. I do want to quickly shout out another trio, the Three Brides of Dracula.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Who are known as Those Weird Sisters by Jonathan Harker. Also, if you wanted to hear about others, Charmed, obviously, is one of the best.
Oh, yeah. Excellent.
Stories of three witches.
Point.
The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. It's always the two aunts and then the one younger.
Yep.
Which there is, for those who are into Doctor Who, there is an episode called The Shakespeare Code, where Shakespeare encounters three witches. And in Legends of Tomorrow, obviously, there is a ton. Once Upon a Time, also a ton Supernatural, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
They have the Fates show up at some point.
They have the Fates. They have a variety of witches.
Yeah.
You guys, it was Supernatural. It was so many seasons. Everybody at some point showed up to the party.
I have to say, so Kaylee mentioned this a little bit, that you can almost clearly draw a straight line between today's three witches and the three fates of Greek mythology. And I feel like you can say that about much of today's tropes, is that they come from either folklore or mythology as either characters or stories unto themselves, and today they are simply used as a reference or a meme in the traditional sense of the word, as a cultural reference. So the three sisters are usually sisters, or usually they know each other in some way that is beyond just like, oh, we met at a coffee shop at some point.
The farmer's market is great.
Yeah. They usually know each other in a more deep way. Maybe they're not necessarily sisters. Maybe they're bonded by some sort of spiritual thing. In Charmed, they're sisters and half-sisters. I believe in Dracula, they are simply bonded by...
They're sisters in marriage,
their husband. Yeah. So they are thrust into a situation together, and they are, as Kaylee said, usually not a good omen. When you see a witch, in the way that, seeing a witch in general is not always a good omen. But, and I thought this was really interesting. I got this from a blog post on Tor.com. For those of you who don't know what Tor is, it's a publisher of genre fiction. And this author talked about all of the ways in which all the places in which you see the three sisters as witches throughout literature. And one of the things that they called out is that farther back in the past, they were actually more akin to fates, where it's kind of neutral, like who lives, who dies, where they're going. It's not personal. The fates are just weaving threads.
A thing has to happen, whether you're the person that causes the thing to happen. Right.
And much of mythology is about people going to the fates and saying, I would like to change this, and them being like, oh no, we don't change. It's not like a matter of us directing anything. We're just weaving threads.
This is just what we saw happen, and we gotta do it, bro. Sorry.
So, for a very long time in literature, these sisters, as they appeared, were kind of neutral, sort of like a genie. If you asked for something, they'd give it to you, but it might not work out quite the way you wanted. Or
frequently it didn't.
They would show up and tell you what happened, but you misunderstood what they were saying, as in Macbeth, where he totally misunderstood what they were saying and then acted on it and suffered the consequences of being wrong.
Which was what they saw.
Yeah. Moving forward after that, they kind of get into a sinister vibe. So we haven't talked about this on the show before, the effect of King James on literature from Europe, but we should one day. The man was kind of out of his mind.
Oh, yeah.
And had far too much power, and King James believed in witches and actually wrote a book about how to identify demons and to destroy them. So much of the literature of that era, which is the post-Elizabethan era, is geared towards appeasing or simply not pissing off a man who may or may not put you to the death if he disagrees with you. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So today, when you get three witches, they're kind of back to being neutral after being sinister from like the, 1600s. Today, it's more back to the Macbeth style where they're just telling you what happens. What you do with that information is up to you. They have the knowledge.
How you get there.
They have their own feelings about what's going on. TV tropes actually separates this into the Three Sisters trope and the Hecate trope.
Oh.
Where in the Hecate trope, we see the mother, the maiden, and the crone. So that's, if you've read Ocean at the End of the Lane, you have the very young girl who's 11 or 12, the mother of that girl, and then the grandmother who is considered a crone. And this kind of goes back to part of the Arthurian legend. So the Hecate legends we don't quite know where they came from, but the idea is that the power of woman is the maiden, the matron, and the crone. The power of a maiden is the seduction and the naivete, the beguiling nature of innocence. The appeal of the mother is the sexual appeal of the ability to essentially have sex, but also to breed. The crone is wisdom. She knows things because she just has all that experience. And because she's a woman, she's kind of removed from public life in a way that men are not. And of course, there's always the kind of shaded figure in the background that is the either evil witch or some other dark aspect of this. I always love a story about the three witches just because I find it so fascinating that you're seeing them together working as a unit but also individually. And I've always found that really fascinating. In fantasy, you often see them as advisors or in some other capacity as fate makers. And I love that. Kaylee, what was your trope?
All right, so I kind of mentioned it before, but my trope was the chosen one.
Mm-hmm.
So from genuinely day one, it was mildly wish fulfillment. Although I think that back in the olden days of yore, it was also a cautionary tale. As with, in the oral tradition, when people didn't have as much maybe practice or experience with writing, they had to teach themselves somehow, pass knowledge along. So they would tell stories. That's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Greek mythology, specifically, as far back as stories go, because also, just to be clear, Beowulf exists as well in the world. And was also a chosen one.
Was Beowulf a chosen one? Or was
chosen by somebody?
By who?
I mean, sometimes people are just chosen by, there's nobody else.
Gotcha.
And they gotta move forward.
I see what you're saying.
In the narrative.
As an adventurer, if I don't do this, no one will.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that there's a prophecy or that, a lady has a power or that to imbue a sword with super cool stuff and gives it to me. Sometimes it's just there's nobody else to go.
Someone has to kill the monster.
Somebody's gotta kill the monster. And then
I'm Beowulf.
Somebody's gotta kill that monster's mom.
Anyway, spoilers for Beowulf.
Spoilers, in case you didn't know. So anyway, especially nowadays, especially the way that we have kind of evolved the trope of the chosen one, it is 100% wish fulfillment. So we as a culture sort of deify individualism.
And again, we're talking about American culture.
We kind of deify individualism to a point. And as a culture, if we feel like we personally have let down the idealized nature of whatever we are personally likeliest to embody, there's always a part of us that wants the validation or the vindication to come from somewhere, some objective force to come through and say, yes, you did it, you figured it out, you're the one, you did it right, because that's how we were raised, and ultimately you're going to repeat that cycle.
One of the things I love about the chosen one trope is that they are not singularly special. So for example, Luke in Star Wars, he's pretty cool and pretty singular, but he's not the only Jedi.
Nope.
He's not the only person who has a grudge against the Empire.
Sure.
And I think that's awesome.
I know, that's fantastic. So what makes a chosen one? What are the kind of characteristics throughout history, I suppose, because it does
the
genuinely
history of literature, yeah,
stretch back to the beginning of literature for our people. So you have your force that is in some fashion choosing the agent, whether that is the Hunger Games, in which it is just like a lottery, and then a volunteering system, or if it's a lady in a lake and a prophecy, or a prophecy, all of the above. Some fashion in which a person or an individual becomes singled out to the narrative. Then you've got the problem, which is identified. And then typically, not always, frequently you have a fatal flaw. You can pretty much point to any real chosen one in modern times and be like, yeah, he's got a whatever fatal flaw, X, Y, or Z. So I will kind of walk through some examples with my thoughts on those, and
Please
then feel free to contribute.
Yeah.
So historically, you've got, obviously King Arthur, we had mentioned briefly, and we've described the Lady in the Lake.
Yeah, well, King Arthur he was just a guy. Like, there was nothing particularly special about him other than the circumstances of his birth and the fact that Vivian was like, he deserves a sword. And
he gets a sword, but he doesn't get any special training. And there are discussions as to whether the sword from the Lady in the Lake is the same sword as Excalibur, etc., which is fair. At the end of the day, Arthur was differentiated, and then his flaw, in many opinions, is that he was very trusting because he didn't get the training. He was raised as a commoner or as a serf, essentially, in his mythology, or as a potential general in the Roman army, and wasn't necessarily intended to lead after a certain level, but did. He didn't know of the threats that he would need to defend against, which came from sweet talking and internal manipulations and machinations. I mean, that's just kind of where we're at from multiple sides. You had people that kind of undermined his authority personally, and then you had people that undermined his authority politically. You had, Lancelot versus Mordred. So those are some of the initial, early examples. And then you've got Jesus. Apologies in general, but Jesus was clearly a chosen one by God himself. But also, he had his adventures, shall we say. He was kind of demarcated by signs on earth. And was he a tragic hero? Did he have a fatal flaw? Yeah. Mercy. And turn the other cheek. You can't, at some point, you have to fight. And he didn't.
So, I obviously was not raised religious, so maybe I have a dumb question, but I thought he did have, special powers.
Sorta.
Like turning water into wine.
Yeah, he has powers. Many of them do have powers. Arthur had a magic sword, and if he kept that sword and kept his courage, he couldn't be defeated in battle. But he couldn't always do those things as a person, as a mortal person in the world.
And that's what happened to him.
So Jesus was very clearly a chosen one in the literature narrative of the Bible. His, again, in my opinion, fatal flaw was mercy, and I think there are some discussions on that topic separately. But there are non-controversial people, like Oedipus was chosen. He was sure there was a prophecy and everything. It wasn't good for him. It wasn't good for his dad or his mom. Everybody was unhappy about this. He didn't choose anything he was chosen. So, again, there are some modern classics. You've got Lord of the Rings. You've got Star Wars, obviously. I kind of mentioned the Hunger Games, Narnia. That kind of really hits into play at the very end of the series, the Chronicles of Narnia, because one of the elements is the whole death aspect, and pretty much die at the end and kind of do the transition. Not all of them, but most of them. Spoilers for the Chronicles of Narnia. Sorry. So for the Lord of the Rings, which I'm not going to get into the Chronicles of Narnia, there's many characters and there's a lot of different flaws, so I'm not going to really discuss that in depth. So Lord of the Rings, Frodo's, I would say, was more indecision than anything.
I mean, he also chose himself. He didn't need to do that.
No.
He could have handed that
shit
to someone else.
He tried, but at the end of the day, there were a lot of things he could have done. He did choose himself at the expense of the world a few times. He stayed in the Shire when he knew there was a critical thing happening and could have left earlier. So, I mean, at the end of the day, his rashness, I would say, is indecision, and then rashness in making a decision was probably his flaw, because otherwise he was perfect. genuinely did his best throughout that whole trilogy. And ultimately, he made great friends and was able to finish out things because of those good characteristics. But if he hadn't had those, he wouldn't have made it. Star Wars Anakin, explicitly defined, especially via the new trilogy, as the chosen one.
He was really interestingly chosen almost in like a Jesus way. The Immaculate Conception, the prophesied baby, all of those things.
And at the end of the day, two things were pretty apparent, which is that you can still fulfill your prophecy and fuck it up until the very last moment. But also, like, people can be really confused. So for Anakin, his fatal flaw was fear. At the end, like at the very bottom of everything, he was afraid of loss, and that made him lose everything. And at the end of things, it was the letting go of that fear and embracing like Luke and whatever, and the love of the future, and like just acknowledging the fact that things would go on and that his son would be around as a person regardless of his presence, whether he could do anything to help him or not. Let him pass into the light and kind of redeem himself.
That's very insightful. I think a lot of people would say that his fatal flaw was his ability to be manipulated.
I think it was through his fear. And then for Katniss, I think it was her loyalty. Her personal attempt to put her loved ones above everyone. And I think that for the story that was being told, I don't think that that particular flaw had an impact on the wider world so much as it destroyed her personally at every step. And I mean that every level of that particular story was designed to break the character that you as a reader were designed to emphasize with and empathize with, because it was dehumanizing, and that was just the way the author intended it to go. So that was the modern classic that I feel like at the end, when spoilers, so for Mockingjay, Primrose dies. She's the character that Katniss started this whole thing for, and she did so much to keep Primrose alive and safe. And at the end, it was a very senseless and inexcusable death, and there's no reason for it, and that's just war. And her flaw here is that she did all of those things and didn't keep anything back for herself, and it wasn't worth anything. And then she gave it all up.
Can the chosen one have a happy ending?
Yeah. I mean, that's the question. Sometimes, sure, but it's a matter of luck, it feels like, a lot of the time. I want to slightly diverge because there are less depressing versions of this particular topic.
Yeah. Let's end on a high note.
Two things, and then I'll talk to one I feel like you personally have a huge stake in.
Okay.
All right. So, thing one. Yes, that counts too. Not the first Pokemon movie, but the second Pokemon movie started a very hilarious trope of the main character being the chosen one. And like essentially what happened in this movie, the second Pokemon movie, 1999-2000, is that there is a weather phenomenon, and the main character washes up on an island that is doing like a reenactment or a play. And they ask him if he wants to be, quote unquote, the chosen one. And he's like, sure, it sounds like fun. And then Morgan Freeman came on and said, no, it was not, in fact, fun at all. Because it was a genuine prophecy. XYZ happened. There was some asshole going around. Anyway, This started a fantastic trope of this eternal, immortal 10-year-old boy being chosen for literally everything. He couldn't throw a Pokemon ball at something and not find out that that was the Jesus of Pokemon. And he had to, like, go take it to the, I don't know, Nazareth to make sure that it could turn water into bullshit honey wine. I got a mead. Anyway, Pokemon, guys. That is, in fact, he is chosen, and they are still trying to figure out a way out of that hole. They're trying so hard.
Like, he's obnoxiously chosen.
It's a very aggressive. He doesn't, guys, at some point they'll explain his dad, and then we'll really be fucked. I don't remember what my second one was because I didn't have it in my notes. I'm really sorry. But the thing for you, that I knew, I have that in my notes because I was like, let's talk about this.
Okay.
So my whole thought on the chosen one, and speaking of Western culture, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, is our kind of approach to individuality. Video games. I want to talk about that. RPGs specifically. Hey, Annie.
Yes.
In Mass Effect, you have a main character that
Sure
is
do.
you as a person, and you have a lot of customization. But by the end of that, what has happened to your character?
Oh, they are deified.
You are chosen to do...
You are chosen.
Some things.
Yeah, and it's one of the points of the series is that Shepard is just a normal person who just goes through some extraordinary circumstances. Some of them happen on screen, some of them happen off screen. And by the end, they end up choosing the fate of the galaxy.
So the idea of the chosen one, I feel like, has been more than pretty much any other literary trope embodied in our cultural phenomenon. And I just think that's such a fascinating idea because RPGs are so prevalent and that's everywhere. We all want to be this, but it's just such a fascinating idea for the literary convention.
Thanks for listening. I'm Annie.
I'm Kaylee.
You can follow The Ink Sink on Twitter, Instagram, Bookshop, or you can email us at theinksyncpodcast@gmail.com. We do want to hear your ideas. We will see you next time.
Bye. I'll follow your lead into the fires of Mordor.
As you have up till now.
Godspeed. We're doing it.